And welcome back. We are now going to go ahead and get ready to introduce something known as masking. And to get started with this, we're going to start first by looking at how we would do this with text. So what I've done is I've gone ahead and created this very basic image layout here. We have a face here with a speech bubble. And what I want to do is have text appear here on the speech bubble. But rather than just have it be statically on here, like I could come in with my text tool, for example, and simply just draw the text in here and have it be an image. But I want this to be more dynamic. I want to make it so the text appears almost as if it's appearing as the character is speaking it. So in order for me to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this face animation here, and I'm going to start by making a new layer, and I'm going to call that my text layer. And I want that to be above the speech bubble here because, again, I don't want that to overlap on top of it. So then I can just draw my text in here. And you can see right now my text is pretty small, so I might want to increase that in size. So let's go to like 36 here. And you can see it's much larger now. So I might say something simple like, hey, how are you? And I can, of course, adjust the size of that text. I can make that larger, so maybe I want that even bigger. I can make it like 72 font. I could change the font style, so right now it's Times New Roman, but I can pick any font that is available here to me within Adobe. So maybe I want something a little bit more casual, something that's not quite so formal looking. So maybe we can do something like Comic Sans, if it's available. And now we, of course, have text within this speech bubble. Now, one of the caveats here is that you might notice is that this text, of course, is running over. We can, of course, can do things like use our free transform tool to stretch and grow this text box as needed. So if we say, hey, we want to make this different, we can do that. Or we can come back in here as well. And again, manipulate these values till we get a value that we are pretty happy with. So that looks pretty good. And I'm going to use my free transform tool to kind of resize this text so it looks adequate for what I want it to be. All right, so there we go. We have our text, and we have, of course, our background. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and lock this face layer here because I don't want to accidentally drag anything on it. So I'm just going to go ahead and lock that. And that will keep me from accidentally grabbing any of these elements. And what I'm going to do now is get ready to create a mask. And what I need to do to get started with that is I'm going to go back to my layers panel here and create a new layer, and let's just call this our mask layer. And we are going to actually use our rectangle tool to kind of help us out with creating that mask. Now, when we work with this rectangle tool, we want to have a couple things here. For example, we don't want a stroke here on this shape, because if we do that, it's going to leave a border effectively in place, and we don't want that to happen. And we can choose any kind of fill color we want, but I'm not going to use black simply because I don't want it to have the same color as my text or this speech bubble, because then that might be a little confusing as to where one starts and one ends. So I'm just going to go ahead and pick a different color to work with. It doesn't matter effectively what color we're working with here. So pick whichever color that you think is going to work best for you. I'm just going to go ahead and choose a green here because, again, that's a real nice, easy color for me to see. And what I also want to do before I actually insert this in here is I want to put in a couple frames for me to have this animation with. So let's just say for now, let's just choose 60 frames. So that's a 2-second animation. So we're just going to go ahead and insert those frames. And let's go ahead and back this up until our first frame. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and just draw that rectangle so that it covers this H. And that's what we want it to do. Now, notice I accidentally placed it on the text layer, so we're just going to undo. We want to put that on the mask layer here. And so now it will cover that H. And this is the start of our animation. And you might wonder, why is it starting here and not at the end? That's because when we do the mask effect, it's going to pretty much work left to right here. If I wanted the animation to work the other way, I would start on the right side, and then I would work toward the left. But because we're starting here, this is where we're going to start. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say about every 5 frames, I want this animation to update. So I'm just going to go on my mask layer here. I'm going to go ahead and insert a keyframe, because remember, a keyframe is effectively like a new animation. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to take that free transform tool, and I'll be able to use that to kind of resize this square every time I move through here. Now I'm going to back this up just a little bit here, just for 1 sec, because there's one thing that we do want to do before we insert this new keyframe, and that's we're actually going to apply a classic tween to this animation. Now, of course, it's going to say you have to convert this to a symbol. That's okay. And now let's go ahead and go to frame 5, and we want to say where we want this shape to start. So, for example, I might have it start off to the side here. That's okay. And or we could even have this be smaller just so it fits inside of this animation here. That looks pretty good. And so let's go to frame 5. And at frame 5, we're going to grab this same piece that we've been working here with. And we just want to take that piece and extend it now, so that way it is over our first letter. And we're going to repeat the same process. Go to frame 10, insert another keyframe. And I'm going to extend this so that now it's going over the next letter. And you can start seeing how this process emerges here. So again, insert keyframe at 15. I'm going to just extend this just a little bit so that it's coming up and over the Y. You do notice that, of course, Y is a little bit bigger, so I might have to stretch this rectangle just a little bit to make it fit. And then we, of course, can go to frame 20. And we can repeat that again. If I look and say, oh, I need to make sure that's big enough, of course, we can always go back to a keyframe to make sure we get that to where we want to be. And we're just going to go ahead and have it take up as much space as needed. Rinse and repeat with those keyframes until you get to a point where you have now covered the entire animation. And if you cover more than one letter, that's okay. It's just however you decide that you want to put this animation in here. And just a few more frames here, and we will have everything covered. All right, and that looks pretty good. We now, of course, have keyframes spanning every bit here, and you can see how the rectangle, of course, is now moving across this. Now, at this point, we have created effectively our masking animation. Now, creating the mask is very simple. All I'm going to do is go to my mask layer that I had created, right-click on that layer, and you can see we have an option called Mask. If I click on that, you can see that the text has now disappeared. And if I were to then play this animation, you can see that the text now appears, because we had created this animation so that way it will play through it in effect. So it is masking the text layer, and it is a pretty natural transition. Now, of course, you can always come in and adjust these keyframes. You can slide them around using the Shift key if you need to move them to extend this. But we set this up in such a way this looks pretty natural, because we pace this out at a pretty good pace. And if we play this, it doesn't look like it's going too fast. So that's pretty good. Now, we might say, maybe we want to adjust which letters are appearing at what point, in which you can unlock these layers here and come in and do those adjustments. But for our purposes today, I think this looks pretty good, where we can come in here and get started with an animation.